All right, folks, welcome to February 10th Java Operators meeting. Welcome, everyone. Glad to see some familiar faces and hope to have a lively discussion as always. Let me share the agenda. Okay. All righty. Let's go ahead and get started. Do we have any new faces that would like to introduce themselves? I think I recognize most of the names. Okay. None of that. No, I was in the middle of cleaning up the agenda and I forgot to clean out the items from last week. Sorry about that. Okay. Anything anyone wanted to bring up and discuss in the community interests? Announcements, new things coming down the pike, releases, or
we are working on this big new feature, the abstraction of dependent resources. If nothing else pops up, we can show you. I think I was working on that mainly this week. Hopefully will be the MVP released end of next week. We'll see.
it's funny. I keep reaching to touch my screen to hit unmute like an idiot. I was on a phone call this morning and kept hitting the phone, so I was like, all right. No, I don't have a touchscreen, so it's really foolish to. Okay, if no one else has anything, we can talk about the abstraction if you would like. Don't know what happened there. Okay. Did you want to go ahead and do the abstraction, or okay? You want to share your screen?
Maybe share my screen. Yeah.
Okay. You always have good presentations.
Basically, would like to. Which example is the best to show this? Maybe this Tomcat one. So it's pretty much work in progress. We are targeting a minimal viable product, which is stable and reusable next, hopefully end of next week. That's kind of an estimate. And basically, what we I think already Chris showed, it's this part. It's one way to do this is kind of defining some dependent resources in an annotation. And that for now, it's the workflow is that we have these components and these are reconciled one by one. For now, there's no dependency or something like that supported between them. That's coming later. But basically, then we just define these dependent resources, which where we define a desired state, a resource, what you want to achieve. And everything from that point happens in the background. There are some other stuff you might to override at this point of time, but we are pretty consistent that we can generalize that. And at the end, in most of the cases, it will be just the desired state, what needs to be defined. And basically, the desired state of a Kubernetes resource is then just applied, reconciled. The informers are registered for that, so everything happens around. So it's, and also solves lots of issues with what we have now when we have to make explicit, like comparing the actual state to the target state, updating the resource if necessary, and all the logic that you want to, it's repeated or repetitive, will be kind of covered with this, plus additional optimization that is not very urgently doable for now. So I was working mainly this on a standalone part. So basically, for now, as I mentioned, it's just a list of resources. So, and more are coming, but so to cover corner cases or just to have this more programmatically defined, there is another example here, the web page, which will be providing in 2 flavors. This is with the new way, but there will be probably the old reconciler or something, just to be able to show the user what's happening in the background on an end-to-end example. And here, basically, we say that we have dependent resources, will be probably renamed for a shorter name, it's called standalone dependent resources, which I say that we need a config map, a deployment, and the service. And what pretty much happens is provide the event sources, basically the informers in the background. And from that point, we just execute the reconcile method on each free and set the status and return the update status. So it boils down, if the logic is just this straightforward, that all 3 resources needs to be reconciled after each other and are not waiting one to finish or other dependencies, things like that, then it's really just calling the free reconcile method, and pretty much everything that has been done before, all the logic is handled for you. And how these are looking like now, it's basically just this part, which defines the target resource definition. Like for deployment is like loading the YAML and setting up some variables in the YAML. And basically that's it. So for now, there are some missing parts like nicely matching resources, but that's coming tomorrow. So it's in the next branch, by the way, everything should be stable there. And yeah, so basically that's it. This is going to be pretty much refined, changed, and will be probably under a warrant that in the coming next 2-3 releases, we are having this, we'll consider that kind of experimental. That means that small API changes will be still basically reserved, or basically will probably happen. And the API will be not fully stable for this dependent resource part. But the classic old API will probably stay intact, so it will be the same. Okay, that's in a nutshell. We have an umbrella issue listing the to-dos, basically, until the MVP. So please feel free to review, comment, would like to see there. And yeah, basically we'll already handle a bunch of issues which are currently not necessarily handled out of the box. So you have to just make lots of boilerplate code to fix that. Not sure if this is clear, what we want to achieve. What is the goal with this? I don't know. Haven't been Adam or someone who haven't been here for a while. There is also
I know what this is about, so I think it's clear for me. But honestly, like I'm not sure it's clear for others who were not there for like the earlier discussions, because you didn't really explain like what is this trying to solve. Although maybe this meeting is not the place to like go into the details on that, but it was pretty much like in the weeds kind of presentation of like.
Yeah, we talked about a few times last 3-4 weeks that yeah, maybe I pretty much and show the abstractions, maybe that will clarify some parts, and maybe you can.
I mean, I think, I mean, I don't know, maybe someone can say otherwise, but I think pretty much all the attendees that we have today have already seen the presentation of the concepts maybe once or twice or even more. So
Okay. Yeah, it's
I
true. I
don't know.
skipped a few meetings. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, obviously you can still repeat, but unless
I think just only this part is new that reworked basically this week. So basically this is our high level abstraction. What is a dependent resource? And basically something that might provide an event source, not in all cases. For some reason, it has a resource type that's just more technical reasons. And pretty much it just implements a reconcile and a delete and provides the resource if you can get the resource from it. And basically, this is what we work at the highest level. And then we have an abstract dependent resource which already implements the reconcile, what you pretty much do in every reconciliation. Like this logic you should implement for every resource. You put it in the reconciler. And basically abstract is a way just to create a desired state, what we usually you provide, and then a matcher and create an update method. And pretty much, then again, we have another abstraction for Kubernetes, but resources where you can actually very nicely implement this. So at the end, just the desired state needs to be provided. So basically, we think this is the abstract model that what a dependent resource is in Kubernetes world, and where we can make very nice abstractions so the user don't have to think in the terms of how to achieve it, but basically just what desired state to achieve at the end. So yeah, for example, deployment, just a deployment resource. There are some interesting aspects, how to, for example, compare things, but I don't want to go into details. It's just if you have any questions then.
I'm actually interested into the compare thing in the sense that would you be able to check some fields and exclude others? For example, if you want to reconcile only if something in the spec have been changed and not, for example, if a label has been added by the user.
That's the goal of the match method, that it basically you implement that method to specify whether or not the resource that you get, the actual version, matches the desired state that you want. So how you make that decision is completely up to you. We provide default implementations for that, like Attila is showing, where we check the equality of the specs. But in some instances, like for example, I think we have in the Tomcat example, there's a matcher implementation where it only checks one field on the spec. And if that field doesn't match, then you go through the reconciliation. If it matches, then that resource is never considered. So you can have a finely grained. I mean, what this work boils down to is that it really removes the boilerplate stuff, where on the basic logic of what a reconciliation means, and allows you to focus on defining your desired state and what it means for a resource to match or not match that desired state. Because those are the two salient aspects of, I mean, in most cases for a controller, those are the two salient questions that you need to address. And we think that this work allows you to really focus on those two aspects that are really important, while the rest, I mean, still important, but it can be handled pretty much automatically by the SDK, or at least we think it should be handled for most cases by the SDK. I don't know if that answers your question, Andrea.
Completely, thank you, amazing.
And one thing that Andrea, and also Luca was asking for is basically these workflows. And basically, That is coming probably after we release the MVP.
Yeah.
And having like a state machine in the background, which actually not state machine in the sense that it stores state, but it's how the designing a workflow basically depends on. It's basically coming after that. So that's the plan.
Nice. If just ping me in an issue if I'm missing anything.
Yeah, just one interesting aspect, because if there are no other questions, you cannot really do this. So if you, for example, define a deployment or any Kubernetes object and you create it, Kubernetes will automatically fill some default values like some timeouts in the specs of a deployment template. So there are values which have different values after it's filled by Kubernetes API. So what we plan to do is actually after create or update, the last updated or cached resource will be compared. We'll cache that resource and that state or that spec will be compared with a new resource coming from an event.
Yeah, but that will only be needed if you don't want to implement your own matcher, basically. If you know exactly what fields you want to match, then you can optimize that by implementing your own match. Providing your own match method implementation. But otherwise, we'll have some default generic behavior that should cover most cases.
So pretty much we can push this to quite far away. Like, for example, secrets and config maps don't have specs. There we probably compare the data, but all this stuff could be done quite generic in a generic way. So we'll see how to spend based on the feedbacks and how it makes sense to do this equal checks in general. By the way, other way to do it is just compare the basically the desired state has some field values filled in. Maybe just that values filled in could be compared to the actual state. That's other way to do it, which is a little bit less bulletproof, but it doesn't need a cache. So yeah, so there are some trade-offs we will see. Maybe we provide both and users can choose.
Yeah, and then you can also build on top of that. It's one possibility. Obviously we will. There's the workflow aspects of things where you have dependents that depend on another, and they need to wait before starting their own work. Or they don't need to, because you could always reconcile, right? But if you want to optimize things, you could have more workflow-like behavior. There's also, we could do also automated aggregate status generation, where the status of the primary resource could be automatically computed based on the status of its dependent. Then you could also think about, that part, I'm not sure if that makes that much sense, but you could also provide kind of default implementation for very common Kubernetes resources. For example, for a secret, maybe a nicer way to deal with creating a secret, updating it, etc. Because sometimes you have, it's not that complicated, and you pretty much more or less always do the same. So for the common use cases, we could have a default secret dependent resource implementation that people could use out of the box. Same for config maps, or maybe maybe it would make sense for other Kubernetes resources to do that kind of thing. But yeah, it's just the starting point. We feel it's already quite useful and cleans up a lot of very common use cases quite nicely. And yeah, we are excited to hear from you and see what you think.
Yeah, this looks great, guys. Which demos are? I see the web page demo. Which can I look at that are updated to the new
all
way?
of them. All of
All
them.
of them. Nice, nice.
And I think just one part, there's the web page reconciler is not, but the Tomcat reconciler is. While there are some interesting places which for now feels a little hacky, but maybe we'll discuss that later. These injections you, Chris, you mentioned, you raised up yesterday.
Yeah.
But basically this is with annotations and Tomcat and MySQL, and the web pages with the standalone. And again, the web page, since it's the kind of a standard case, it will have also a low-level API and implementation, and also this higher level.
Yeah, we mix the samples. They mix the different. I mean, we try to keep a mix of all the different ways to do it. So the most complex one is the MySQL reconciler, because it shows how to do dependents that are not Kubernetes dependents. Kubernetes dependents are a lot easier to deal with because we don't need to basically deal with an external resource. So we know how to create, update, query for those resources when we are dealing with internal Kubernetes resources. When we are dealing with something that's external, then you need to provide more information to the SDK. But it's doable. Like Attila was saying, there are some hacky things because and we probably need to clean that up even for Kubernetes resources. But for the MySQL example, we especially needed to be able to pass information between the primary reconciler and the dependence one. So that information gets injected into the context that is passed around. Using that, you can have
what information is that?
Well,
curious.
it depends, but in the case of the MySQL, it's kind of an implicit way to have chaining between dependents, because in this case we create the secret information, and that gets injected into the context so that the schema dependent resource can use the information that is more or less generated for the secret dependent. So it's passing around the secret and DB config information basically. So it's not that part is not super clean. So we
because the main controller is creating the database in MySQL. It creates the user, then it knows the password that it used to create the user, but that password needs to get into the secret dependent resource.
Yeah, that's what's going on. I mean, because the entry point to the reconciler is the main reconciler, right? So that's where the database config gets injected in the first place. I mean, if we add some kind of if we had dependency injection available, we wouldn't need those kind of hacks, because that's what we would be using instead. We would get, like if we were using Spring Boot or Quarkus, we would get those data injected directly in the dependence. But since we're not using, we don't have a dependency injection framework, we have to do it manually, and so it's a little awkward. But other than that, yeah, some of the samples, like Attila was showing, some of the samples do the wiring manually using the dependent resources abstractions. Some use the annotations, and there's one sample in the Tomcat example, actually, there's one dependent I mean, one of the dependent, well, actually, this one is, or maybe that changed, but that the Tomcat sample was mixing both, where you actually had one dependent that was defined as an annotation and the other one was manual. But maybe that got changed again because maybe it was confusing.
I think
No, yeah, it's in the web app reconciler where everything is done manually, so that you can still show how to do it. I mean, the current version of the SDK is still fully available. So if you don't want to learn that new dependent resource abstraction, you can still do whatever you were doing previously, and it will still work. And you don't have to learn any new thing. There are just one change with respect to how you instantiate informer event sources, but I think it's cleaner now, especially because that unlocks new use cases that were not easily feasible before, meaning that now you can have your informer event source watch several namespaces, where previously it was restricted to only one.
So basically that is the informer event source is now wrapping multiple informers if needed. And it's just a matter of configuration. So if you have a selected number of namespaces.
By the way, how does this, so that when there is a dependent resource class and from that you create objects. So do you create a new dependent resource object for every single dependent resource that you create? Like in that MySQL sample when I'm creating a secret. So how do I create the secret then?
So I think this is not really so primary name. I think this is not really working as it should here, because we are putting it always the same password.
I'm not about the actual secret value, but the secret object. There
is one instance. One instance of it always. So here it's you just define it here, the secret dependence resource, and everything happens for you in the background. But it creates just one object, and basically as it was for now, just you have a cache in the background in the informer, and if you receive the event, it receives basically the primary object, the MySQL schema. So the informer, the reconciler, if you take a look on the abstract, that would be clear from that. So the reconciler receives the primary resource always in the context.
Yeah, okay. So if you go back to the controller or the reconciler, yep.
So nothing happens here. This is just setting the status, because how it works, that basically this is just in case you use annotations, it happens everything in background for you. The plan is that just in this order, the reconciliation is called on these objects in the background for you. Like in the web page reconciler, we call it manually, right? The same thing basically happens for you in the background if you are using annotations, and the reconcile is just a kind of a post-processing.
Yeah. So what happens in the annotation? I mean, if you don't wire the dependent resources manually yourself, what happens is that all your dependents, the dependents that you declare, get all reconciled before your main reconciler is called. So I mean, right now, I think it covers all the basic use cases, but obviously if we probably, like we mentioned, we probably will need to handle some kind of workflow-like behavior. But for now, what happens is that your dependent resources get all reconciled, and presumably for your main reconciler to work, then that's presumably you need your dependents to be ready, right? So that's why they all get reconciled before your main reconciler gets called.
Sorry guys, but I lost. I still don't understand how do we create the secret. Sorry for the stupid question, but I'm still don't. On one hand, I don't understand how can we get away with putting just the secret name. How do we? Where does it password? Oh, that's just okay. That's just like configuration, the password, secret name, username.
Yeah, but
stuff
that's I mean, that injection in the context, that's more an optimization, because that could be redone, I think, in some other way. But if you look at the secret dependent resource class, then the way you create the secret is by providing the desired state based on your primary. So you can see the MySQL schema, which is your primary resource, gets passed there, and you basically tell the SDK, when I get a resource, I mean, this MySQL schema, this is what my dependent should look like. And then the reconcile method that's implemented in the Kubernetes dependent resource that Attila showed is doing the boilerplate stuff for you. It looks okay. Is the actual state of, I mean, for one thing, do we have a secret that matches on the cluster? Do we have a secret that matches that exists? If it exists, does it match the desired state? So if it doesn't exist, we create it. If it doesn't match, we create it or we update it. And things, it's basically the same behavior that you implement for pretty much any reconciler, right?
Okay.
That logic is the base algorithm for the base reconciliation algorithm.
Right, and who tells that secret dependent resource controller-ish thing that you should create a secret now? How does it know that it needs to create a secret?
Well, that's what I just explained. It's the reconcile method in the
basically. I think it's for Adamant is a controller of the so what happens here in the reconciler? We have a controller in the background, and basically before this is called in the controller, it's called reconcile method on that secret. So maybe I can show that code.
It's in a dependent.
So there has to be a code
manager
somewhere that actually goes to the MySQL server. I even don't see that code. Where is that code?
Which
the code that goes to the MySQL server and actually creates a database.
Okay, yes, that's here. Where it is reconciler, the secret schema. This is a schema dependent resource, and this is not and it goes there. It gets the resource, so it implements the same abstract, but this is not a Kubernetes object. This is an abstract dependent resource, right? So it's not operates with Kubernetes, it operates with MySQL. And you implement the same interface. And there's a schema dependent resource. Basically, the desired state is just the schema, right?
Yeah, okay.
The match is the equals, create is going to the server.
So then everything is a dependent resource, basically?
Yes, yes.
I thought there is like a main resource and then there are dependent resources, but then everything is just a dependent resource.
So there's the main resource. But
what's the main resource then?
And here is the MySQL schema is the resource.
And the actual schema in the MySQL database is the dependent resource.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
So in this example, you have a mix between a Kubernetes dependent and an external dependent.
Yeah.
I think makes that sample interesting but also more complex to understand, obviously.
Yeah. So it's but yeah, I get it now. And okay, and so then a secret object is created by So who
Yes.
creates the secret then?
So it creates the secret dependent resource. It's registered here in the. So it defines that we have these dependent resources in the annotation, and that in the controller, just before you would reconcile the whole call the reconcile method, right? In the reconciler that you're usually calling this. Before that, it calls reconcile on every dependent resource, which is in these annotations.
Mhm.
So this was
I would love
this. Yeah, sorry.
I would love to see like a flow diagram or something for this, because honestly, I'm starting to get it, and probably I need to spend some time looking at that code. But on the other hand, it's not a good sign that it's so hard to grasp on like what's going on there.
Yes, I mean this was we already were discussing this. That yeah, I mean it's inside the core, right? It's inside the controller, and it could be a different layer.
No, it's
yeah,
not. It doesn't matter if it's a different layer or not. I just would, maybe it's just me right now not being able to like properly wrap my head around it. Yeah, so let's not worry about like complexity, but more like I just would like to understand it, and I feel like would maybe I need some time to spend with the code, but also if you guys could create maybe a flow diagram with the main actors, you know, like how does who calls what and like what happens in this.
But yeah,
that would be great.
The generic idea is that
first point.
the dependent resources are kind of mini reconciler, if you want, and using the dependent resources, you have your main reconciler for your primary resource that gets called by the SDK at some point. But before, if you declare that your primary resource has dependents, or you wire them manually, well, actually, no, if you wire them manually, you have to do it yourself. But if you use annotations to declare dependents to the SDK, then the SDK will see, oh, okay, you want a secret and you want a MySQL schema. I mean, you need a secret and you need a MySQL schema to be able to reconcile your primary resource. So you have to tell me which implementation to use for the dependent resource, and I will take care of reconciling those dependent resources for you before I call your reconciler. That's what happens. The SDK will take care of creating the secret before it calls your own your primary reconciler.
All right. Okay. So yeah, but and does it take into account that the secret comes from that's the problematic part, right? That the secret actually needs data from the database, so there is an ordering and there is a data transfer happening.
Yes, sharing data, basically sharing data between these dependent resources is kind of a problem that it's not very elegantly solved now. We can access already the resources from each other through context. It was there in the previous versions already, but will be probably enhanced and improved. With the standalone, it's a little bit better because you then can use the share variables. Yeah, in the if you have a standalone mode, then basically you can see each other if it's created an object or something. You could use it. It's basically a supplier, right? So the supplier in Java has the context where it's defined. So it's already easy to kind of I could use in the desired method. I could use now the config map and get the resource from there. You cannot really do this if you are don't use a standalone mode. You have to do it somehow else. So that's why it's
using the context. You can do it.
Yes. So you have to put it explicitly in the context.
No, right? You don't. You do get you do context.
Yes.
Secondary resource.
Yes. Sorry, I made a wrong example. So if I would have here the database secret, DB password, right, something like this, then I could use this in the supplier directly. So annotations are obviously a little bit limited in Java for a good reason. But if you have a very specific or sharing data, maybe you might want to use a standalone mode. Also, there is different reasons to have this standalone and annotations. With annotations, actually, you can very nicely then define these explicit workflows later on. So we had some scenarios when we really wanted to wait until a deployment is ready, right? Or things like that, or MySQL is up and running. And then we want to introduce this depends on notation, which is pretty much same as in Terraform or in CloudFormation or anything else, which is managing infrastructure, which will wait for a condition until the next step happens. So you end up with a very explicit declarative definition of a workflow with annotations. That would be much nicer. Of course, we want to also support this with standalone, maybe with some using the same classes in the background. Because there are some, what happens if you want to do some part of workflow, then you do some very special thing and do the other parts of the workflow. So it's very hard to make it absolutely generic, but probably we'll end up with a very nice generic definition of a workflow with these annotations. Also, is that clear what we are aiming for? So.
Yeah. It's clear. It's just yeah. I think needs some getting used to, and probably will need some good documentation for people to to understand it properly on how to. And these edge cases of data transfer and stuff will need to be handled in some well-defined way.
Yeah. Maybe we will revisit that. So maybe it's not needed, or maybe for that standalone is a better solution for now. We'll see. So it's.
Yeah, we could.
By the way, if you go back to
I mean, we could provide a MySQL reconciler implementation using the standalone version, so that we could compare both, see if it makes more sense standalone or using annotations.
Yeah. So actually, we are also with Chris, we are just discovering the limits and possibilities here, and based on that, we are. But I think
that's
skeleton of the design is quite clear, and I think it's quite proved that it's for now.
How would it look like, by the way, if the real database schema wasn't a dependent resource, but the secret was? Wouldn't that make things clearer and easier to handle? Because then the main reconciler could maybe give the password more easily to that dependent resource, to the secret dependent resource. Because this whole thing, by the way, what you're doing here is this context.put. Well, the password shouldn't, and the secret name and the username, neither of those should be global values. They should change for every single.
Yes, actually, there should be something like this here. Oops, I don't know what I did. Primary .get name or something for every field. Because this is, if it's for a different schema, you want different password, I think.
Yeah,
MySQL.
I mean, that has nothing to do with dependent resources, though, because that implementation is strictly the same behavior as the one that was previous. I mean, in the
not really, because the previous implementation had the advantage that everything was in a single method. So
but I mean, as far that thing of namespacing the password, that didn't exist in the previous implementation either. That's what I'm saying.
I mean.
So that
it did, but there was no need to pass the password between two different methods, even of the same class. So it was easily, you just generated the password and then created the secret object on Kubernetes, and that was it. So you never needed to pass the password to or namespace or do anything with it.
Sure, but I mean, the point of making that example is not necessarily to tell people that that's how you should be doing it. It was more actually and maybe it's indeed, and maybe that's probably why we should have both versions, so that people can make their minds up themselves. But it was mostly to check that it was still doable to implement the same use case using annotation-based configuration, basically.
Mhm.
So indeed, in this particular case, it might be better not to use annotations, but that wasn't the point of the exercise.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine, I think.
And I mean, and obviously, since it's awkward, it also means that we need to make it better as well. So it shows that we still have work to do.
Mhm. Yeah, I think so. Sharing this, sharing stuff, and basically maybe we'll have different context for this. If you have with annotations, for sure. I don't know. So that's an interesting part, because yeah, again, if you have standalone, then there is there are these language limits. What we face with annotations. On the other hand, annotations are really good with. Very nice just to define this decorative way a workflow. So it's both have pros and cons. We will see.
Yeah, I mean, annotations are definitely better for simpler use cases where it follows the basic pattern of having a whole bunch of dependents that are mostly Kubernetes dependents that follow the typical reconcile algorithm where you check if the resource exists. If it doesn't, you create it. If it exists, does it match the desired state? If yes, then nothing to do. If not, then update it and be done. So that's the annotation configuration is really optimized for that specific use case, which I think covers a lot of the common use cases. But sure, if your use case doesn't fit that that pattern, then I mean, by all means, you don't have to use it. You can use, like I said, it's still possible to write your reconciler just as it is now. So dependent resources are just another tool in your tool belt. And annotation-based, I mean, declarative configuration of dependent resources is yet another tool that you're free to use or not if you don't want to, or if it doesn't fit your use case.
Yeah, basically, I mean, the whole goal is you can still, and you can use the old API with the old ways. We didn't tend to change basically anything. It was kind of a backwards compatible after everything was backwards compatible. Almost, I think the Informer API changed only a little bit, but yeah, and you can just use then one building block maybe with dependent resources and others the old way. So it's really an opt-in way of doing things. But again, it's lots of logic what should happen, and you should rewrite it or tend to forget it, or it's solved by you if you just describe these workflows. And again, I think that even for the depends on and condition weighting and things like that could be in top of this. So there will be just really a workflow engine on top of these building blocks of dependent resources, which are reconciled after each other, and that's it. So I think that will be, and at the end, it's really will be easy to describe a workflow and yeah, with simple design, just if it dark desired states, and ideally this sharing information between them will be solved. I think that we'll need some different context for this managed resource. We call them managed. I call them managed, managed by the annotations and the manager behind that. But yeah, so maybe we'll need to extend that too. But I mean, standalone and both are basically ready inside for this, and yeah, it's usable now. Just we'll polish it, document, and everything.
Cool. Well, thank you, Attila. I really appreciated that.
Thank you.
I
Yeah,
let
well
it,
done, guys. This is
because-
going in a really good direction. I really like it. Looking forward to how it ends up.
I let the discussion go just because it was a good one and there was no other items on the agenda. So I looked at the issues and there was a few, but you already triaged them and labeled them. So that looks like that got handled. So did anyone else have anything they wanted to bring up, discuss? We have not 8 minutes. Okay, if not, then we will give you 8 minutes back. Thank you, everyone, for the discussion, and see you guys next week.
Yeah,
you.
thanks for all that explaining, guys. See you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye bye.
Amazing work.
Bye.
Bye.